做事严谨、注重细节的分析型是应该如何执行 performance review 呢？还要注意什么呢？Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast. I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. We've covered every other style, and now it's the analyticals time for performance review tips and tricks. Today, we want to cover both sides. If you're an analytical manager giving a performance review, what should you keep in mind in the way that you communicate? Or if you're an analytical getting a performance review from another style, how can you best prepare to get information in the meeting or even get information that you really want ahead of time?
So a little quick recap. Analytical 它其实就是非常注意所有细节的人。当然了，分析型嘛，所以他需要所有的 information 都在他掌握当中 and they will collect all the information and then make a decision. 所以当他如果今天是做主管的话，当他在给 performance review， 很有可能呢，他可能也会将所有他觉得需要 information 全部都会讲出来。They will list out everything that they think it's really important, but if you're on the other side of that conversation and you're not analytical, let's say you're a driver who really treasure concise and succinct information, it's your job to do your own summary and to do a quick recap to make sure you got all the key takeaways that you need.
So as a reminder, the analytical is low on assertiveness, which means they're more ask-oriented, and low on responsiveness, which means they're more controlling of their emotions. As Sherry said, when they're interacting with another style, let's say that driver, the driver is also low on responsiveness, so they are also more controlled in their emotions. They like to pride themselves on logic. Both of these styles think that they have a very cool way of looking at the logic of a problem. But back to that assertiveness scale, drivers are more on the end of tell-oriented, where the analytical is that ask-oriented. Well, this becomes a very interesting interaction when the analytical is actually giving the performance review because they're used to asking, they're used to gathering information, they're used to having as much information or trying to get as many answers as possible. But in performance review, they need to reveal those insights. While a driver is that extreme side of, well, give me the key information and let me go. So how this interaction works makes a really big difference. This will also be true when it comes to an analytical talking to an amiable. Both very low on assertiveness. They're ask-oriented. They tend to gather information, but the amiable being high on responsiveness, being more open with emotion, being more people-oriented or team-oriented. Now when the analytical gives information, it's not about just the cool logic. It's also about how does this have to do with the team? How does this have to do with our company culture? And making those adjustments as necessary.
那刚刚有提到嘛 analytical 的人对于情感跟 emotion 上面是比较收敛的，跟 driver 一样。那其实 amiable 跟 expressive 就是相反，所以你会发现 analytical 当他在讲很多事情的时候，有的时候 driver 他可能心里有一点急，因为他可能听不到这个 key takeaway， 但他不会马上的表现出来。那个最急的人一定就是 expressive 呢，马上就会说你到底在说什么，或者他会很急的想要问一些问题，问出他想听的东西。所以我觉得这个部分蛮有趣，是有的时候 analytical 在跟 driver 讲话的人，他可能并不会马上察觉到对方的那个迫切需要这个 key takeaway， 但是呢在 针对 expressive 的话呢 it's a lot easier to tell that someone is getting a little bit anxious.
So if you're an analytical and you're giving the performance review, for most analyticals is they see all the interconnectedness of the information they're giving because they're the ones who gathered it all. They've probably written notes. They've gone back through what they've said, and they can see how all of these things like pieces come together, whether it's the strategy, whether it's the company culture, whether it's the HR hiring plan. All of this has some underlying foundation. But one thing that analytical has to remember is not everyone has all that information, or not everyone as clearly sees the intertwined logic or all the pieces coming together as an analytical might. So when an analytical gives information and they just go, okay, here's a list of everything we're doing. Here's a list of all the projects you've been on. Here's your performance on all of them. And they're just giving, let's say, raw data or numbers or specific review for a specific project. For other styles, they may be looking at it like, what's your point? Like, I know all this information exists. I get that you see interconnectedness in all of it, but unless you structure your communication for others, they don't see it as clearly as you do. So in the case of driver, you need to structure it in terms of key points. What are the key takeaways or what are the key action items that all of this information comes together on? If you're talking to an expressive, it may be more about the personal connection with them, the validation. What did they do well? What are their improvement areas? But being very clear on these things up front. When it comes to an amiable, it may be more clear about what's going on with the team, what's going on with the culture, what's going on with the company going forward. What's the bigger picture of us as a team together? Those may all be in your notes. But when you're talking to these other styles, you have to remember that what they're looking for, what their ears are open to, are different than all the information.
Right. And actually reminds me, I had an old boss and when I was like doing my internship. And I remember a lot of my colleagues at a time would tell me that, okay, when you're listening to him speak, just pay attention at the very end because he would do a quick recap himself. When he says, in conclusion, that's really when you start paying attention because everything before that, it was just a lot of information that you may not understand. So I think it's sometimes kind of interesting to know that trick or how a certain people would phrase important information. And I mean, you can kind of, let the other know, but I think it's a really interesting thing. Like you just kind of pay attention to the way they speak and the pattern they speak.
So what's interesting is even though they're opposite styles, sometimes an expressive and an analytical have the same speech pattern, which is they think out loud. They dump information dump on everyone, all the things that are going on in their head. In the case of expressive, it's more like that emotional or thought process out loud. For the analytical, it's like, I need to information dump all the data on you so that you understand where my conclusion comes from. So in the case of both these styles, it may come at the end. Whereas the driver is the actual true opposite to the analytical of, you need to know A, B, and C. If you really want the information, I'll talk about it after.
Right. Yeah. Now let's say it's the analytical who is going into this performance review and they're receiving all these feedbacks from the other style of communication. So what should they really pay attention and how would they advocate for themselves?
So in the case of the analytical being the reviewee. Before we talked about what do you do as the reviewer, but the reviewee is a different position because the reviewee both fits into the natural communication style of the analytical, but it's also one of the styles that is going to feel the most incomplete from a performance review. What I mean by that is, in a performance review, if the analytical is being reviewed, they have an opportunity to ask a lot of questions, right? That's, again, the natural style. So if they hear something in the review, then they are very welcome to dig into it. Like, oh, what do you mean by that? Oh, on that project, I remember these things. Can you confirm what you saw, etc.? But it also means that back to, let's say, the driver is doing the performance review. They're going to go in there and be like, all right, I can get this done in like 15 minutes. I'm just going to tell them what their strengths are, what they need to work on, and what we're going to get done next year, and we're good. But with the analytical, you may just feel like, well, that's a very truncated way to talk about an entire year of information. Or they may feel that whoever's reviewing them is not taking into consideration all of the data that analytical may have put together, may have remembered. So it's one of those things where you have a chance to ask a lot of questions, but you also have to be prepared that the other side, your reviewer, your manager, is not preparing in terms of the whole thing. They're preparing in terms of, if it's a driver, what's the key points? If it's the expressive, it's what are they thinking about at that moment in terms of performance or in terms of relationship. If it's amiable, it may just be the aspect of what's going on with the team. And so as an analytical, you need to keep this in mind.
When it comes to facing and interacting with other styles, it's always in your best interest to talk about or advocating for yourself what you want, what kind of information that works for you or what kind of information that will help you to get to the next goal, right? So don't be afraid to ask questions, right? 问所有你需要问的问题. Like for example, 请问我要该怎么做一个 next step? What does success looks like for you? What does that look like for the rest of the team? I think these are all really valid questions to ask. 所以你在 performance review 的时候，虽然你是这个 receiver， 但是你还是可以问非常多的问题。
Yeah, the same advice that we've given to every style throughout this month is just because you're being reviewed doesn't mean that you can't find a way to structure that performance review in reverse, which means almost treat it as though it's an interview where the person is answering questions based on what you want to know. So let's say back to the expressive. The expressive has certain things on their mind that they want to explore with you, get a back and forth conversation. But that also means as an analytical, you have to put yourself out there to ask the questions to fill in the gaps you want to know about, right? And expressive may be in the moment of that performance review or in the moment of certain projects, but going back to early 2023, you might say, okay, we made these kind of decisions back then, and we're doing this kind of project now. Could you talk to me about how we got to that place and how I was able to either be flexible or how you see my role working into these shifts that we're going through? So it's always important to keep in mind that you have that power to ask those questions. One last piece of advice is that, okay, as an analytical, and this may be true for our amiable styles as well, that sometimes it takes longer or an analytical needs time to process information or to really make sure that they get what they want out of their meeting. Always remember, you can either email your manager ahead of the meeting and go, here are the things that I would really like to get more information on. Again, analytical is a data-oriented if you can ask for that data ahead of time. Otherwise, if you ask in the meeting, they may not have exactly what you want. Or after you have your performance review, email them and go, I really thank you for this opportunity to better understand, but here's a few things I would like to understand better. So you have a chance to go back and forth through each performance review.
我们在这4个单元，我希望大家都能够了解到你要怎么样去 be flexible， 然后遇到不一样的这个 communication style 的人，不管你今天是主管角色还是在接收这个 performance review 的角色，你都可以去询问去了解你所需要的一个 structure， 你所需要的 information. But also at the same time, you can always think ahead and plan ahead as well, knowing that what your listener is going to be like, what they're asking for, then you can have all that information ready to go. And that can ensure you to have a better and more effective performance review.
And this is a strong piece of advice for any style. But keep in mind that whether you're the reviewer or the reviewee, the way that most companies handle performance reviews, especially for self-advocating or speaking up for yourself, really are aimed at drivers and expressives. which means that if you want to have a true comprehensive performance review, or you want to allow for that for especially analyticals and amiables, you should give them the option and tell them very upfront that there is communication open via email, via written communication message before and after, so that they can process, they can send the information that they want, or they can clarify what they want later. This is the most likely way you're actually going to get a full performance review that is balanced for all 4 communication styles. Well, we hope that you enjoyed this deep dive into each of them. Again, whether it's through the performance review or through our previous month on social styles, there's a lot we can learn about communication to make things smoother and to even it all out. Join us as we go into more exploration throughout the rest of the month about the performance review. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.